Have you ever met a killer? About 12 years ago, I was in my early 20s and living in a southern state in the US. Late one night, I realized I urgently needed to buy something, so I went to the only store near me that I knew was open, a Walmart supercenter that was open 24/7. This store is located right off a major US interstate exit, I-85, and it was around 1 a.m. on a weekday when I went there. The parking lot of this store is huge, and often truckers, big rigs, would park their trucks in the lot overnight, along with some random campers and RVs. I was in line to check out and immediately noticed the man in front of me. The store was otherwise almost empty. He was a youngish white guy, average build, maybe in his 30s. He was hunched over, with a baseball cap pulled down over much of his face. He purchased the following items: a shovel, a 3-pack of duct tape, rope, a set of zip ties, a box of latex gloves, a pair of leather gloves, an empty gas container, the red plastic kind, and a disposable cell phone, one of those track phone type things. He seemed unwilling to engage with the cashier, who also seemed annoyed to be working at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. Fair enough. He paid in cash. Even if he hadn't been buying those specific items, I think I would have felt creeped out. There was just something off about the situation to me. I know that sounds crazy, but I sensed something wrong. But to buy those specific items together and nothing else at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, and to pay in cash? I waited in the store for a long time and asked the assistant night manager to walk me to my car, which he didn't want to do, but finally agreed to. The next day, I called the local FBI field office and reported the situation. The person taking the complaint asked me repeatedly if I was calling in response to a specific crime, creepiness, but they took my information. I didn't hear anything or see anything on the news that caused alarm. Then, a few months later, the local FBI office reached out to ask if I had paid with a credit card at Walmart. I did. I never heard from them again. I have no idea who the man was, what he was doing, who he may have harmed, or where he did it. I don't know if he's been captured or not, but I'm pretty darn sure I witnessed someone buying things to murder someone else. When I was a teenager at college 20 plus years ago, this is the UK, so ages 16 to 19, I worked part-time at McDonald's to supplement my student grant. It was a common and popular job choice for college and university students because it paid pretty well. We had a guy working there in maintenance, in his late 30s, so much older than most of the staff. He tried to fit in, but kind of missed the mark a lot of the time. His name was John. He suddenly appeared with this girl who was 19, 20 years his junior at the time. She was really sweet, but definitely more on the matronly side, which sounds like a horrible thing to say, but she seemed more suited to John. She was lovely and obviously really smitten with him. One day, I was in the basement, which is where the staff room and freezers were. There was me, another guy, and John. I remember the other guy making a joke at John's expense, which made me laugh. John, holding a Stanley knife, came up close and started yelling at me while waving the knife around. We kind of apologized as the other guy pulled me away. We didn't say much other than to a few other people who'd heard John yelling, but really only to say he was weird, I guess. A few days later, all staff were called into a meeting. And I mean all the staff, those who had a day off, were on leave, and so on. The manager who called the meeting told us that John wouldn't be returning to work, and that if anyone asked us any questions about him, we had to direct them to the door. It turned out he had had a huge argument with his girlfriend because she had tried to end their relationship. She tried to do it nicely and face-to-face, but John had flipped. They argued, and he grabbed a mallet he just happened to have lying around and hit her over the head. Then he strangled her with a tie until she lost her life. He then handed himself in at the police station. He was immediately remanded and ultimately given a life sentence for her death because he admitted it. A couple of days later, 2 older ladies came in asking to speak to the manager. I asked who they were so I could get him. One of them said, John's mom, and I felt terrible. She was totally broken. She clearly loved her son, but couldn't deal with what he'd done. Like I said, this is the UK, so even if he served his full sentence, he'd be out of prison now. Probably nearly 60, but you know, he still murdered someone. My ex-landlord has been the subject of numerous national news and investigation programs because he is a popular suspect in his girlfriend's disappearance. I knew both of them personally. My brother went to school with her kids. It really hit home when I started seeing comments on videos like BuzzFeed Unsolved asking about the case. The part that always freaked me out the most was that less than a week after her disappearance, he was publicly dating another woman with the same name and a very similar appearance. When I was 14, my best friend, who was 13 years old, took a man's life. Not just that, but she actually held him hostage and harmed him over 2 weeks. She wasn't alone. There were 3 other people involved. My best friend was the youngest. There was a documentary made about the whole incident. It contained awful images of the poor man they hurt. He had been burned with boiling water and beaten up. It was just awful. In the documentary, they showed some texts sent from my best friend to one of the others in the house. I recognized her way of texting right away. She texted one of the others about how the man they were hurting was crying and she couldn't sleep. I mean, damn, that was my best friend. I had no idea what she was capable of. And at the age of 13, I called her during those 2 weeks she spent in that house keeping him hostage. It still haunts me that I talked to her and still didn't figure out something was up and could have actually saved this man. Long, crazy story. I used to be an assistant manager at a busy gas station in a small city. I worked overnight shifts alone, and there was this regular who seemed to have a crush on me. One night, he drove up and parked at the gas pump, came inside, and then went into the restroom for 5 hours. During that time, he stripped naked and kept wedging the large toilet paper roll between the door so it would stay cracked open, allowing him to watch me work. I was kind of scared but, stupidly, didn't want to call the police, thinking he was just high. Luckily, I had at least one customer in the store at all times, which was extremely unusual for the overnight shift because I would normally have long periods of downtime on my usual work nights. Anyway, fast forward to him watching me through the door for hours on and off, and I kept yelling at him to close the door, get dressed, and leave every time I caught him doing it again. I still don't know why I didn't call the cops. I must have been an idiot. Finally, at 6 a.m., another regular customer of mine came in, and I told him about the guy in the bathroom. He banged on the door, threatened him, and got him out of the restroom for me, while scolding me for not calling the police hours earlier. I thanked him, and that was that. I never saw the man again. Until months later I see on the news that the exact night he was stalking me at work, he took his girlfriend's life with a bedpost. To this day, I feel I could have been his second victim if it weren't for the dumb luck of constantly having customers that night and my friend coming in that morning. I like to think God was watching over me, making the night busy. I was never contacted by the police or anything. It was an open and shut case. It's still creepy to think back on. I was at a bus stop at dusk when a guy in a van pulled up and asked me if I needed a ride. It was immediately suspicious, thanks to forensic files, so I gave him a firm no. He parked, got out, and went to the payphone about 10 feet from the bus stop. He picked up the receiver and had a fake conversation. I knew it was fake because he never put in any change. After about a minute, he walked back to his van and stopped right in front of me but didn't turn around or say anything. He just stood there with his back to me for what felt like forever, and I'm convinced he was weighing whether to try to abduct me or not. I would have fought him tooth and nail, and am pretty sure that my determination is what eventually made him get back into his van and drive away. I'm 5 feet 9 inches and was young and strong at the time, thankfully. It scared me half to death though, not gonna lie. I know a few killers, more than one. Actually, killer one. I know a guy very well and am in the process of getting approved to visit him in Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, where he's serving life without parole for murder. He beat a man to death with a wooden baseball bat over a disagreement involving drugs. From what I know, he had given the man money to get him drugs. For whatever reason, there was a disagreement, and murder was the end result. Killers 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm not sure if these really count for this question, but all 4 took a life. They are all drunk driving offenders. If it's not clear by now, I'm a recovering alcoholic active in recovery, so I routinely cross paths with troubled souls. Killer 2 purposely ran over 2 bikers one night while driving at 4 times the legal BAC limit. One died at the scene, and the other will never walk again. He was sentenced to the maximum of 27 years. Killer 3 passed out at the wheel and plowed into a vehicle from behind, forcing it into the guardrail, which shredded the cabin and the driver. Killer 4 killed his best friend one night. They both got drunk and slept in the truck. He woke up and decided to drive. His friend never woke up again. Killer 5 was a friend in high school. He and 3 others were heavily using hard drugs one afternoon and riding around in Killer 5's small car. He rolled through a stop sign directly in front of a tractor trailer. 2 of the 4 friends died on impact. He spent 4 months in a coma and 2 years in a hospital. He's severely disabled and the only one on this list who didn't serve jail time. The parents of the deceased pleaded with the courts not to send him to jail, as they felt him living with the aftermath was more than fair judgment. He was credited with time served and given probation. I met a killer, a confessed killer. We went to college together. His name was Farah Jorge. He was a doctor and killed a patient/girlfriend in 2003. He admitted to the crime, and for some reason, Brazilian law is so weird, he was released from prison in 2007. In 2009, I started college, and he was one of the first people I met there, but at the time, I didn't know who he was. I was 13 when the crime happened and didn't pay attention to the news back then. I even thought he was a teacher or something like that. It was only later that a friend of mine told me who he was. We didn't attend the same classes except for one. He was studying philosophy and I was studying Portuguese/English languages, but I'd always see him around campus and sometimes exchanged a hello or good afternoon with him. He was very calm, polite, had some friends but not many, kept to himself a lot, and never talked about the case. At least I never heard him talk about it. Just once I heard him complaining to a colleague about some reporters who were following him because of a TV show about killers who were released or something like that. He had to leave college in 2011 or 2012. I don't remember the exact reason. I think he went to trial again and was released one more time, but after that, he went to another college. Sorry, my memory isn't the best. He died in 2017, killing himself after finally being found guilty of murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison. I have a hard time writing about this. When I was in high school, during my senior year, my boyfriend was much older than me and had a number of friends between my age and his. We were all doing a Dungeons and Dragons campaign every Saturday at my boyfriend's house, with about 6 of us. One of them was in my English class. Before that, we hadn't really known each other. But once we started the campaign in early September, we became close friends at school too. He had severe mental health issues, including paranoid schizophrenia. He was on medication, but in October, the hospital took him off all of it and told him to detox because he was still having hallucinations despite the meds. I still have no idea why they did this to him without putting him on different medication. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, we did the campaign as usual, but he was really off. Then he missed school on Monday. He was there on Tuesday but was very off. He was having an absolute panic attack and went home early. On Wednesday, it came out that he had been arrested the night before for a murder that occurred the previous Thursday. His brother, a thug and bully, took him on a burglary/robbery, which was his modus operandi, and apparently, the little old lady they encountered spooked him and he slit her throat. He hasn't been on trial yet, and it's been 6 years. I still think about him all the time. I used to work with a guy named Eric Grumpold, who ended up killing another coworker of ours. He kept her body under his bed for 2 to 3 months, the sick bastard. I knew them both. Our workplace was very quiet and in shock the day we all heard about it. We just couldn't believe it. What really messed with me was that she had been missing for a couple of months, and nobody reported her missing or thought it was odd for her to just disappear. Work just marked her down as a no-call/no-show and eventually terminated her employment. There was no follow-up, like no other coworkers attempted to contact her, or if they did try to, they didn't think it was strange when they never got a hold of her. And what about her family? None of them noticed she was gone for 3 months and never showed up to work? The entire thing just messed with my head. The only reason all of this was found out was that Eric couldn't live with the guilt anymore and came clean to his dad, who immediately called the police. Part of me wonders if he hadn't done that, how much longer it would have been before anyone started looking for her. If you Google his name, you'll see plenty of news articles about it. Over the next couple of years, we would sometimes receive calls from debt collectors at work asking for him. As far as I know, debt collectors aren't allowed to call places of business, but I could be wrong. Anyway, I would always tell them that they probably wouldn't be hearing from him anytime soon, and to Google his name if they wanted to know why. Unfortunately, I have known a few in passing. My former schoolmate and coworker was mentally slow, a sweet but awkward guy. He was super friendly but lonely, always kind of on the periphery of groups, but I don't think he had many close relationships with his peers. It left him vulnerable. Eventually, he fell in with some trashy kids who went to school with us, but they were a grade younger. 2 guys and 2 girls in particular. My sister was in their grade, so I knew of these kids and had interacted with one of the girls. One night, this group invited my coworker to come hang out. When he arrived at the apartment, he was attacked. The murder was the most brutal, disgusting crime. I don't want to share details because they are truly horrific and stomach-churning, but also because they would be enough to identify both the victim and myself. So that's 4 cold-blooded murderers I knew, sort of. But wait, there's more. Another schoolmate of mine, who I had several classes with, went on to commit a hate crime, murdering a man for nothing more than the color of his skin. I obviously grew up in a rough place. I had a classmate in high school who killed her daughter. This was around 1995 or 96, a couple of years after graduation. My daughter, who I was pregnant with at graduation, was a toddler. I ran into this girl at a gas station in our small town. I hadn't seen her since graduation, and she wanted me to see her new baby. I noticed the car seat wasn't installed correctly, so I showed her how to do it. My daughter had already been saved by her car seat because we were hit by a drunk driver, so I've always been very focused on proper car seat use. A few months later, I heard she had been arrested for killing her baby. She had shoved a sock in the baby's mouth to make her stop crying, and the baby suffocated. I would never have guessed that she was capable of something like that. She always seemed very nice and genuinely seemed interested in learning about car seat safety. Yes, when I was in high school, a student teacher approached my friend and me, asking if we wanted to drink with him in a motel room. We weren't attracted to him in the slightest and laughed at the proposition. That made him angry. He happened to be friends with a family member of mine who was older and an established member of the community. He told my family member that my friends and I were selling drugs, which wasn't true. We were lucky to find a little weed on the weekend. My family member believed him and started a "we must find out what name is doing" campaign. I came clean about smoking a bit of weed, but also shared what this guy had done. It fell on deaf ears. A year later, this man murdered his wife in their driveway while their 3-year-old son watched. The child was quoted as saying, "The bad man tickled mommy. He had fatally stabbed her." He is still in jail as far as I know, and my family member eventually apologized. I stayed sexy and didn't get murdered by the killer I met. I studied abroad in Valparaiso, Chile, in 2010. There's a bar called Cafe Journal that is very popular with tourists on Wednesday nights. Unfortunately, I had mono during most of my semester abroad, undiagnosed until I got home to see a doctor, so I had a hard time keeping up with the Latin American college student party lifestyle. I was always the first one of my friends to go home, but I really wanted to go to Cafe Journal on this particular night because our semester was rapidly coming to an end, and I wouldn't get many more chances. I showed up, had a few drinks, and got extremely tired right away, as one does with mono. I decided to get ready to leave and visit the bathroom quick. On my way back to my friends, I was approached by a guy I didn't know, whose accent sounded like he was trying to imitate a Chilean. He was friendly at first, but I just wanted to leave and go to bed. So I politely told him it was nice to meet him, but I needed to go. He immediately became concerned for my safety and tried to convince me to stay with him, saying it wasn't safe to go home alone in that area. It's notable that, as a petite blonde American, I looked quite out of place at this bar, even with an abundance of other tourists present, and he had no way of knowing if I was just passing through. But by this point, I had already lived in the area for a few months and was quite aware of what was and wasn't safe to do. In this case, it was totally fine for me to take a collectivo, a taxi with a fixed route that picks up and drops off passengers along the way, by myself, so I knew this guy was either being macho or weird. He stayed friendly but became very pushy and even more concerned. None of my friends cared that I was leaving alone, so neither did I. My gut told me to get away from him as fast as possible. My aching body said, "I don't care, just let me sleep." I realized I needed to ghost him. I pretended to relent to his concern and excused myself to say goodbye to my friends. Then he could escort me home to safety. I went over to my friend's table and told them this weird guy was being pushy about leaving together, and I was trying to leave by myself, so they should be worried if they didn't get a text from me within 30 minutes. I made eye contact with him from a distance and acknowledged him. Then, I said, "Fuck politeness," and hauled us out of there. I did my best to put as many people between me and him in the crowd, using my short height to hide in the shadows of drunk people. I walked the longest possible way out of the bar and headed in the opposite direction of the Collectivo line to a very well-lit late-night burger restaurant next door. I bought myself a plate of fries, hoping I'd kill enough time that he'd think I left without him. It worked. I walked back over to the Collectivos, made sure he was gone, had an uneventful ride home back to my host parents' place, and passed out safe in bed. Creepy, pushy bar guy's face was all over the news by the weekend. He was Joran Sloot, and I met him the night before he was arrested for the murder of Stephanie Flores Ramirez.